Shabbat Shalom, Parashat Vayikra, Parashat Zachor. My friends, we are enduring a very difficult week, as 8 families are still sitting Shiva after the brutal murder of 8 young yeshiva students in Yeshivat Merkaz Harav. I was zoch as a child to study in this yeshiva, and I remember all too well the halls, the corridors, the library, and can visually sense the horrific moments that these students have gone through. How befitting it is that this Shabbat, as these families get up from Shiva and try to piece together their lives, that we will be reading the parasha of Zachor et asher asalecha Amalek baderech betzitchem Mitzrayim, the eternal obligation to eradicate the Amalekites that reemerge in every single generation. My friends, perhaps it is a good idea for us to spend a moment thinking about the meaning of the commandment. When the Torah commands us to remember something, we must take a step back and say, how can God command us to remember? Remembering things are something that occurs simply by us thinking of it, and it's stored in our memory banks. If we forget something, it's not something because we try to forget it. In fact, the harder we try to forget something, the more likely we are to remember and think of it. So the positive commandment in which we have to remember, which repeats itself for 5 other commandments throughout the Torah, should make us take a moment to think and reflect on what it means to have to actively remember something. I believe that it pertains to the obligation that we have to live our lives in a proactive way in general. Our obligation, particularly when it comes to national responsibilities, particularly when it comes to serious national responsibilities that require the active pursuit and eradication of Amalekites around us. That obligation requires that we take a proactive stance, not a reactive stance, but rather a stance that says that we focus on who we are, where we're standing, what our responsibilities are, and what we must do in order to protect our future and our destiny. I believe an important message that we as a people should be sending our leadership is to stop being so reactive to the environment, step up to the plate and become proactive. Perhaps if we were more proactive with our enemies, perhaps God would have more mercy upon us and we would not have to endure the terrible tragedy that we have endured. I would like to share with you a thought that was expressed by my son in his bar mitzvah this last Shabbat, as it directly relates to the beginning of the book of Vayikra. The book of Vayikra that is dedicated to the service of God in the Mishkan, the meticulous art of bringing offering and sacrifices to God, and the implications that those sacrifices have to the emotional and mental status that we all must have. If we pay careful attention to the way the last book ended, we would be left with an interesting question. We had described how the final creation of the Mishkan brought upon us the presence of God, where the misty cloud of God has descended onto the Mishkan, and it fills up the Mishkan so densely, in which the mere presence of God was so intense that even Moshe Rabbeinu could not enter into the Mishkan. And so the Torah tells us that the cloud filled up the Mishkan and Moshe could not enter, raising an interesting, perplexing question. If we pay attention to an earlier story where this cloud emerges, we will see that the same clouds existed upon Har Sinai when the Torah was given. And there it clearly states that Moshe ascends the mountain and enters straight into the cloud and talks to God. So if this cloud is something that one can enter, particularly if Moshe could enter, indeed, then why was it that Moshe did not merely enter the Mishkan here? Well, if you pay attention to the way the story is told, you will notice that in fact Moshe ascended the mountain to receive the Torah and waited for 6 full days outside the cloud. And only on the 7th day does God call him, and then he enters the mist to talk to God. Here too, the great moment of building a home for God, which is supposed to be a mirror image of the home of God that is built within our hearts, Moshe is confronted with a dense mist that will not let him enter because he recognizes the greatness of the presence of God. And the greatness of the presence of God, as exciting as it is to us, also sends us a clear message. Know your boundaries. Know your limitations. In fact, Moshe waited patiently. And only at our parasha, at the entrance of the book of Vayikra, the words Vayikra are heard loud and clear. Vayikra el Moshe vayidaber Hashem elav me'oel moed lemor. And God called out to Moshe and spoke to him from within the tent. And he calls him in. So beautifully, the Torah alludes to this by putting a very, very small aleph in Vayikra. As our sages teach us, without the aleph, the word is Vayikar, from the word mikre, a coincidence. Moshe wanted to downplay the significance of God calling him, but at the same time also to indicate to us, one does not enter the presence of God without being properly invited. One needs to squash their excitement and their desire to worship Hashem and know to do it in a way that God has indicated and directed us to do so. My dear friends, we are entering a long saga in which we learn a lot about sacrifices. It seems to me that we have offered God a huge sacrifice this past week. Let us hope that God opens His arms and welcomes us into His home. And let us hope that we open our hearts and welcome Hashem into the home that we built for us, for Him within our hearts. Let us hope that He brings swift and full comfort to us as He charges our leaders with the courage, fortitude, and foresight to be able to stand forward and lead our people in a proper way. Shabbat Shalom.